You're listening to Speaking of Health and Wellness, the podcast, where we dive into holistic nutrition, biomedical treatments, functional medicine, low toxicant living, and developmental strategies with a special focus on children with complex picky eating, developmental delays, and neurodevelopmental disorders. I'm your host, Shandy Lasky, integrative speech-language pathologist, pediatric feeding specialist, functional nutritional therapy practitioner, and Epidemic Answers certified health coach. Together, we are changing the conversation around how we view, discuss, prevent, and treat these childhood epidemics. I am so honored to have your time and attention today. Thank you for joining me and for all of your support. Please note that this podcast is for educational purposes only and should never be misconstrued as medical advice or a replacement for individualized care from your trusted providers. Now, without any further ado, let's get started. Hello, and welcome to episode 8 of Speaking of Health and Wellness, the podcast. If you're new here, hello, welcome. And if you are a returning listener, welcome back. Grateful to have you here. At the time of recording this episode, the podcast has officially been live and announced to the world for just over a month. And we are at over 575 podcast listens just on these first several episodes. And I am just blown away by that number and by all of the positive feedback that I've received. So thank you, everyone. You know who you are. I've never created a podcast before, and I wasn't really sure what to anticipate with the process, and especially wasn't sure what to expect after releasing it into the world in terms of engagement and all of that. So thank you again. They are a lot of work, and it still feels pretty vulnerable to me. And so I just really appreciate knowing that you're getting value out of them. With this first season of the podcast, what I'm hoping is that I'm laying down the groundwork and the foundations to really keep building onto this content. So if you are new here, and especially if you're brand new to these topics of holistic nutrition and gut health, the gluten-free, casein-free diet, etc., I really encourage you to just take a moment to jump out of this episode, go back a few, and start with some earlier ones to really build on that knowledge, and then come back to this one. I really wanted to create this episode as a follow-up to episode 7, which was titled Gluten-Free, Casein-Free, GFCF. You'll also hear me say interchangeably. GFCF diets, picky eating, autism, and other neurodevelopmental disorders. What's the connection? This is the name of my previous episode, as well as a previous blog that I wrote that's on my site, speakingofhealthandwellness.com. And just like the podcast, my blogs are in-depth and long-form as well, so I'm breaking it up a little bit here with some previous content into podcast form, and this is a continuation of that. So you'll find a lot of what I'm going to talk about today on that blog that I just mentioned, which will be linked in the show notes for you to check out if you want. I don't know that all of the podcasts moving forward are going to continue to be long form as they have been, but again, like, what I wanted to do now with these first several episodes is really lay that groundwork down to keep building on it so that you know where I'm coming from as we start getting into more and more strategy and treatment modalities and talks about different things that just might not be typical or conventional in nature. So let's go ahead and get into it. As a follow-up from episode 7, GFCF diets, picky eating, autism, and other neurodevelopmental disorders, what's the connection? I wanted to continue chatting more about this transition process to GFCF diets for these children and their families. I covered the very, very beginning basics of the diet in the previous episode, like what gluten and casein are, why they're an issue for some kids. So again, if that's where you're starting, hit pause and go back to that episode, because there's probably going to be some overlap here, but for this episode, I'm really picturing that you've listened to the last one and that you understand the justification for a gluten-free, casein-free diet trial and the very beginning basics of it, like what the proteins are and where they're found. So from that perspective, when parents now reach this point, they are starting to wonder more about, okay, well, is the gluten-free, casein-free diet all or nothing? How long do we have to be on this diet? What happens if they eat just a little bit of it? Can they have some occasionally? What happens if they accidentally eat it? These are some of the frequently asked questions in that time of the transition, that beginning phase of the transition. And so I thought that I would just cover it here because these are questions that I get all the time. And while I do have the blog written up, again, I know that everybody's not reading blogs these days and that it's sometimes just easier to throw on a podcast and multitask. And so thank you for choosing this one today to multitask to, whatever you're doing. I hope that this is valuable for you, and I hope to answer these beginning questions for you. So let's start with, is the gluten-free, casein-free diet all or nothing? I know that this is not what you want to hear, but the reality, unfortunately, is that in order to really judge the full effectiveness and the full potential of the gluten-free, casein-free diet, it must be all or nothing for a while. Now, that being said, if you are transitioning to a gluten-free, casein-free diet, I do suggest adopting it gradually for your child and your family. Expect it to take time to transition to fully having a healthy gluten-free, casein-free diet. This is not something that's just like easily done overnight, especially if your child struggles with complex picky eating, which you can learn more about in episode 4, Is Your Child's Complex Picky Eating a Developmental Phase or a More Complex Issue, where I go deeper into that topic. If your child does have complex picky eating or a pediatric feeding disorder of some sort, it's going to be a lot more difficult to transition. But that being said, sometimes that's all the more reason to do so if that biochemical, nutritional component is there where your kid is reacting negatively to these proteins rather than being nourished by them. I often find myself saying, if it were easy, my job wouldn't exist. And I say this because I think parents just need to be reminded that it is not easy. It is not easy. It seems like it should be, right? I know for parents, like, that's your job, right? It's your job to nourish and feed your child. But for some kiddos, it's not easy. So I just want to validate that it can be really tough. While I believe that the gluten-free, casein-free diet is so important for many of these families, when complex picky eating is involved, with or without the presence of any other developmental symptoms or conditions present, the thought of changing your child's diet is incredibly daunting and overwhelming, especially when they're so limited and most of their foods contain gluten and dairy. I highly encourage you to get professional guidance from a feeding specialist and or a nutrition professional who can help you navigate through the mealtime and nutrition aspects. And I know that is so much easier said than done, especially if you are in a more rural area or if you are in a country maybe that's not the United States, that doesn't really have, it might be a little bit more behind in this, in term, like some of the clients that I've worked with around the world, they've told me like that literally, I don't even know if a feeding specialist exists in my country. Like, we're just not there. So it can be really, really difficult. It's it's so much easier for me to say it than for it to be done, right? To find these professionals to guide you with these things, which is why I'm so passionate about the work that I do. And it's kind of like I don't know, I don't even know how to say this, but like, it's like the silver lining of this weird pandemic world we're living in, that everyone is moving more to this online model, and that's where I already had shifted. And so I feel really good about where I am and being able to continue to support families in the way that I have been, and that families are like, it's just becoming more and more normal for us to have these parent coaching, distance, teleconferencing options that we now have. But so feeding specialists are not always easy to come by, especially if you are not in a bigger city and all of that. And then on the other side of that, there's the nutrition provider aspect of it, which you probably have gathered by now that my nutrition perspectives are very different than the mainstream, traditional, conventional nutrition knowledge out there. I tend to follow a more holistic bio-individual nutrition paradigm, which I talked more about in episode 3, holistic nutrition and bio-individuality, where you can learn more about that. So I know it's easier said than done, but for some kiddos, especially when there's something structurally, functionally, and more going on, a feeding specialist can be really, really, really helpful. I feel like this is an important time to note, though, that most feeding specialists, traditionally, we are not trained providers to know or understand the gluten-free, casein-free diet enough to understand its enormous potential to help reduce inflammation and so much more. And feeding specialists, most often, we are not thinking about the biochemical and the nutritional aspects of the foods that our clients are eating. And so, because that's just something that we weren't trained in. The knowledge that I have is additional training that I have taken, and from my own personal experience, having gone through different elimination diets and specialized diets for myself in my own healing protocols and things like that. So, sometimes you need to construct a team, and thankfully, again, now we're in this world where we are seeing more and more providers offering distance opportunities. So hopefully maybe that helps with access rather than hinders it. Although it's very difficult, I imagine, to do like true feeding therapy via telehealth, but I'm sure that it can be done. Now, my approach is not feeding therapy via distance. It's actually a parent coaching role where I'm coaching the parent to implement the strategies. So it's different, but anyways, typically feeding specialists are mostly focused on the structure and function, the motor and the sensory and behavioral assessment and therapy strategies, which is great. These are all super important too, but if a kid is quite literally addicted to gluten and casein proteins, like we discussed in the previous episode, then you can see how they'd want those foods more and more, and they drive more towards those foods with intense cravings, because they are experiencing underlying biochemical reasons that are creating those cravings. And I know it seems really intimidating to think about that, but sometimes these are the kiddos who need the gluten-free, casein-free child the most. It's like the chicken or the egg. Like, are they eating these gluten, casein-filled foods that are oftentimes from an oral motor perspective, they're very easy mechanically to chew and swallow, and they feel safe with these foods. And so you wonder, like, did the biochemical aspect kind of create this delay in them progressing to other foods and textures, and now they're stuck not only oral motor wise on these foods, or is it possible that the oral motor issues, you know what I mean, like they created this dependence because these are the foods that they feel safe with, but then over time that lack of diversity and the overabundance of these more aggressive proteins on the gut lining, like we talked about in the gut health episode, over time, those wreak havoc on the gut lining, and then that's where they're able to get into the bloodstream, cause that opiate addiction-like response, and all of these things. So you wonder, like, is it oral motor that happened first, or was it the little, did they become, like, biochemically addicted to this food, and then that delayed the oral motor, and now we're in this, like, cycle. It's a weird cycle. Either way, both of those aspects need to be considered and addressed. The oral motor, sensory, structural, functional aspects, as well as the biochemical and nutritional aspects that are related to their picky eating, as it relates to the foods that you're going to introduce and all of that, because the kids who are so limited, where they're down to like several foods, most of which or all of them contain gluten and or dairy, that is a huge red flag for me. But we would want to expand their diet before removing from their diet. And the best way to do that is through professional guidance. At the time of this episode release on March 9th, 2021, Speaking of Health and Wellness is currently accepting new distance coaching clients where I am supporting families through this transition process to holistic nutrition using gluten-free, casein-free diets and more, while navigating developmental strategies and lifestyle changes to support the journey to health and wellness and optimizing your child's development. So if you are wanting to start a gluten-free, casein-free trial or other type of specialized diet for your child, but they have complex picky eating with and or without the presence of any other diagnosis or developmental delay, and you need support, please check out my distance coaching package options on speakingofhealthandwellness.com. I will link that in the show notes. And if it looks like we might be a good fit to work together, then you can self-schedule a complimentary discovery call and apply for my distance coaching program to see if we would be a great fit. Because again, it is not a simple and easy process to do. And when there's complex picky eating or a pediatric feeding disorder involved, that's when it can be the absolute toughest to transition. These can be standalone struggles, but they often pair and overlap for kids with developmental delays and neurodevelopmental conditions. So to circle back to the main question, is it all or nothing? We got off on a little tangent there, but yes, it is all or nothing to see the true benefits and the greatest results. But that being said, the transition itself should not be seen as all or nothing, because the transition to being all or nothing, to being like fully gluten-free, casein-free, that transition needs to be gradual, mindful, intentional, and preferably, again, with professional guidance, whether that's with me or someone else to support you. And I don't just say this because I'm the professional offering the support with this. I say that because complex picky eating and pediatric feeding disorders are not to be taken lightly. When children are severely self-limited eaters, they are missing out on nutrient density and diversity from their diets. And this lack paves the road to different deficiencies and downstream health and developmental issues related to these nutritional deficiencies. So plan to gradually transition. Actually, while we're talking about the transition, I also want to note that I don't start right away at gluten-free, casein-free diets with my clients. I meet them where they are, and I prioritize elimination of the top suspected triggering foods that could be setting off a child. So if a child is still eating foods with artificial flavors and MSG and food dyes and artificial colors, preservatives, synthetic food ingredients, all these things that are often found in the standard American diet, we start there first. If that's where your child and family are, please go back to episode 3 and listen to Holistic Nutrition and Bioindividuality episode. And you can hear more about the starting steps to consider before you even go down the route of gluten-free, casein-free diet trials. Because here's the thing. If you're going to do it, if you're going to transition your child's diet, expect it to be a transition. It is uncomfortable. It is not always easy. It is sometimes overwhelming. Now, there are much harder things in life to go through. Trust me, you can do this. But it's not just like easy peasy, and I don't ever want to make it sound that way. Mistakes, they're definitely going to happen. So just be ready to be gentle and forgiving with yourself and about the situation overall and whoever's involved, and just move on. Just like keep on keeping on. I understand though, and I want to acknowledge that when a child is extremely limited, the thought of switching everything that they eat is way overwhelming. And this is literally what I do, guiding family through these changes. So I get it. And I never want my podcast or my content to come across like, oh, this is so easy. It's so simple and it's black and white. Here's the info. Go ahead, do it. It's just not reality, you know? And as I tell my clients, when you finally reach the stage of your child eating gluten-free or casein-free, mark your calendar, make a little note in your phone or something for each one. And then more importantly, you want to note when you fully reached that gluten-free, casein-free diet point where they're fully gluten and casein-free both. Mark your calendar, make a little note in your phone from there. It is widely suggested by most functional medicine and holistic nutrition providers that it can take at least 6 months minimum to judge its effectiveness. And as I shared in my last episode, I truly believe that it's worth a full commitment for at least a year and then reassess. And I know that that's not what some of you want to hear, but I'm just trying to be real and help you wrap your mind around real expectations. There are going to be points during that year where there are whoops moments. And so you'll be able to see how they react. Some kids do, it's very obvious that they don't do well with that food. And so it's no problem for the parents to continue on with the diet because it's very clear that they are having a reaction. So I truly believe it's worth a full commitment for a year. If families are going to try it, I want them to do it correctly and long enough so that I want them to do it correctly so that they don't give up and so that they can see it as the full picture of how it truly impacts their child and the potential for their child. A disclaimer that I hope I don't have to make here, but just in case, here it is. This is not some miracle cure-all diet. That is not what I am claiming. Definitely not. Some children see profound results right away, though. Some take much longer to see those results. Some kids see improvements, but maybe not as profoundly as others. It's all bio-individual, but it's definitely worth giving it a try. There is existing research that shows via biomarkers in the gut that gluten actually creates some leaky gut or hyperintestinal permeability for everyone when it's consumed, not just those with compromised gut health or those with celiac disease. For more info on gut health, go back to episode 6, How Gut Health Impacts Your Child's Health and Development, to learn more about that. One of the best studies that we have to demonstrate the improvements of the gluten-free, casein-free diet on health and development was a 2018 study showing great health and developmental improvements after a full year of dietary intervention and supplementation by Dr. James Adams and team. I mentioned this in my previous episode as well, but just to kind of touch on it a little bit here, it was a study that was focused on children with autism specifically. And I go deeper into it, and it's linked in my blog as well. That's linked in the show notes. So I'm not going to go that far into it. But for those who may just be tuning into this, the researchers outlined a healthy, gluten-free, casein-free, and soy-free diet for their participants to follow, along with nutritional supplementation. After a year, the study participants showed all sorts of health and developmental improvements. This study is specific to autism, yes, but here I am again, like a broken record, to tell you that we can use the research we see in children with autism to think broader to other demographics of children who have overlapping underlying biochemical and physiological similarities to these children who are on the autism spectrum. Children with other neurodevelopmental disorders, children with developmental delays, children with complex picky eating, and or pediatric feeding disorders, and more. The point is that the diet improves the body's ability to do what the body needs to do. If the body is reacting negatively to these foods, if it's hurting more than it's helping, then it's causing a stressor rather than a support, and it's hindering the body from doing whatever the body needs to be able to do, right? So when you remove it, you're allowing more space for the body to be able to do what it wants to do, to be able to do what it needs to do. The body is always working for us. Our bodies want to be healthy. Our bodies want to thrive. They're always trying to bring us into homeostasis. But if it doesn't receive what it needs, it can't. Nutrition, the nutrients that we receive from our food, these are literally the building blocks for our body. Food is information to our body. Our body is always trying to bring itself back into balance. These protein molecules, gluten and casein, for some children, they are inflammatory. And that's the main point to keep coming back to here, is if it is inflammatory, it's hurting more than it's healing or helping. And furthermore, it can create more and more issues the longer it's continuously consumed, especially in such large amounts. That can lead to more food sensitivities and other unpleasant symptoms that you can learn more about in that gut health episode of like that downward spiral once that all happens. So let's come back and talk about timelines. How long does it take to see the results? How long will we need to remove gluten and casein for? Generally speaking, it's estimated that it takes about 3 to 4 weeks for complete elimination of the casein antibodies to leave the system. So if you remove dairy, casein, fully across the board for 3 to 4 weeks, then at 3 to 4 weeks, no oops moments, you are now witnessing what your child is like on a casein-free, dairy-free diet. For gluten, unfortunately, something that you're not going to want to hear, but I've got to be the one to tell you. It's about 4 to 6 months of complete and total elimination. 4 to 6 months for gluten antibodies to leave the system. So really, you cannot judge the true effectiveness of the gluten-free, casein-free diet until 6 months of no oops moments. I learned from an autoimmunity expert, Dr. Amy Myers, during one of her interviews that I watched while I was in these transitions myself many years ago, that just even one bite of gluten can send your immune system into response for 4 to 6 months, even when you've been gluten-free. I also learned from Julie Matthews of Nourishing Hope that some children would react to Play-Doh through their hands. And I can tell you, since I've been practicing and working with families, I have seen this. I thought it was wild when I first heard that several years ago, but when I started speaking of health and wellness and started working with families on all of this stuff, it is real. And I've read that gluten is too large to be absorbed through the skin. But again, like I've known kids that have reacted. So perhaps there's some like hand to mouth contact at some point that was missed, or a cross contamination in some way, somehow. I don't know, but I personally err on the side of caution and recommend my clients to avoid any possible topical skin gluten interactions. So making gluten-free Play-Doh, things like that. Now, okay, that being said, for myself personally, still, years later, I don't do well with gluten. And I can eat cow's milk, casein, and dairy, but it is inflammatory for me still. I can tell that I'm still reacting. Like, okay, let me back up. So for gluten, like it's going to be a more serious reaction. It's going to be a migraine, potentially vomiting, GI distress. Like it's going to really kind of mess me up if I'm glutened accidentally. But dairy, it's more of a low level, like a much, much, much lower level response of inflammation. So it could be that I'm more anxious, or I've got, some issues with like constipation, or acne is a big one for me if I eat cow's milk dairy. But I mean, these are like from back when I was trying to introduce them. It's been a while since I've tried to reintroduce cow's milk dairy, because every time I have, it just hasn't gone very well for me. But at least I know that it's not going to be a violent reaction, rather than like I know that gluten typically would be. But yeah. So for me personally, that all being said, I can tolerate forms of casein found in goat milk. So it is a different type of casein protein molecule that is more easily digestible, and I can tolerate goat milk yogurt, goat milk cheese. I try to get these forms of dairy in raw form so that the enzymes to digest them are still present. Sometimes that ultra pasteurization, I get why it's done, but it also kills a lot of the good enzymes that are required to actually digest those foods. So I think that might be another piece of why maybe I don't do so well with dairy. But anyways, I'm just trying to give you some perspective that, yeah, maybe for a year or so, your kid is gluten and casein free, but maybe, or however long you decide, like you're the captain of the ship here. So maybe eventually they will be able to eat those foods again, but it's all very bio-individual based on that person. So I'm just sharing my own personal experience here to kind of give you some perspective that Don't think after 6 months you can just like reintroduce these foods and expect them to be good to go, because probably that's not going to be the case. There's some rebalancing work and healing and sealing of the gut lining and things like that just really need to take place. So what happens if they accidentally eat something that is not gluten-free, casein-free? Mistakes are bound to happen, first and foremost. So just take a deep breath in and out, all right? Here's what to do when there's an oops moment. Mindfully observe what happens. Watch for any behavioral and or physical symptoms that might appear in the days following. Watch for a full week. Are they more irritable, whiny, clingy, craving, or asking for their offending foods more often? I'll even have some kids that will sneak foods, like they were never sneaking foods before, and now they're like stealing foods and running to their rooms with it, and we've got to navigate that. Are they more spacey? Are they less engaged? Are they constipated? Do they have diarrhea? Are there any skin rashes or bumps or anything like that? Write it all down. Write it all down. This will help you and your child's team identify offending food triggers and patterns over time. This is also a great opportunity to teach children about how foods impact their bodies, not in a way that's demonizing that food, but in a way that is appropriate, age appropriate, that is teaching the concept of bioindividuality, teaching them what works and what does not work for their body specifically. So that language, depending on your kiddo, it might look something like this. It looks like your body is going way too fast. I wonder if it's because you ate those cookies or crackers or that pizza, etc., whatever that food was, right? Like if you know the food that it was, then, oh no, I'm so sorry. It looks like you're having a really hard time with your poops today. I don't think your belly liked that kind of cheese. I think it's making it tough for you. Or maybe, it looks like that, whatever food made your skin break out. We're going to need to take a break from it for a while because it looks like that isn't working for your body. I repeat, we are not demonizing foods. We are not telling them, no, that food's not good for you, or that's bad for you, or I said so. Like, that's not where we're coming from with this. We are teaching them what works for their body and what nourishes them specifically. This is a teachable moment. When there is an oops moment, consider looking into these different supports to have on hand whenever there's like a diet infraction. Again, this is not medical advice. I want you to speak with your child's providers to see what follow-up they would specifically recommend for your child. So that might look like DPP-4 enzymes, which help support the digestion of gluten. But you have to watch out for some of the ingredients of those on the market. I specifically try to find chewable forms of these for kids rather than capsules, because most kids can't take capsules. But if your kid can take capsules, great. But if you're looking for the chewy forms of these, you have to watch out for any other sneaky ingredients that might try to find their way in there, like other things. Activated charcoal can sometimes be helpful, whether they drink it or can take it in a capsule or, eat it in some other form. Activated charcoal kind of grabs and binds and can just be helpful when you've eaten something that you want to help kind of like bind to and get out of you. There are also some belly soothing herbs, like Organic Olivia has a great line for kids that I have linked on my website under products on speakingofhealthandwellness.com. I've become an affiliate or a brand ambassador for her line because I love her products so much. I take them personally for myself, her herbal creations, as well as recommend them to my clients all the time. Mighty Minerals by Organic Olivia is like one of my top recommended supplements that I suggest to parents of picky eaters. Again, you can find that through the link of my site, speakingofhealthandwellness.com. I've got her line linked there. Other supports would be increasing hydration and maybe adding a squeeze of lemon into their water to help support digestion, natural detoxification, give them a boost of vitamin C, all that good stuff. And then lastly, magnesium or Epsom salt baths, where they can just kind of soak and relax and get that support for their sulfation pathways and things like that. So it just really, these things just kind of help when there's been an oops moment. It just kind of helps bring the body back into balance and give the body some support while it's helping you regulate, essentially. And then just, let it go and start again. The mistakes, they're going to happen. Just don't let them get you down. I know it's easier said than done, because here you have been working so hard to keep your kid gluten and casein free, and so-and-so accidentally gave them the food, or they accidentally snuck the food, or whatever. I get it. It sucks. But it happens. Take it as a learning experience. Just keep moving forward. Use it to your advantage to observe and fuel your why you're implementing the diet in the first place. Many parents have shared with me that these whoops moments when there's a diet infraction, that this is actually where they get the real buy-in from the non-believers around them. When there's an oops moment at a birthday party or with grandma and grandpa or otherwise, those who are there to witness the child before and after the exposure quickly realize that, wow, I guess whatever food does really impact them. Not everyone is going to understand or agree with the approach that you're taking to try diet changes, especially not at first. The more people who are potentially feeding your child, the more grace, patience, and consistency you're going to have, especially expecting that there will be errors. Keep coming back again and again to the start and keep moving forward. We're aiming for the least restriction with the highest nutrient density. So we have to remember that just because a food or a meal is gluten-free and casein-free, it doesn't mean that we're eating healthy. Our focus should be shifting to maximize the nutrient density and decreasing artificial food additives and agricultural chemical residues. Just like gluten and casein, these food chemicals and like artificial colors, flavors, and preservatives, these can wreak havoc at the cellular levels, especially in the gut and the brain. And really, that's one of the biggest points of the diet, is to help heal and seal the gut and the brain from these invaders that have made their way into our bloodstreams. If we're removing the gluten and casein, but not continuing to improve the overall quality of their diet, then families will be missing opportunities for further and faster healing of the gut and balance of the body overall. It's a slow and steady process. It's not done overnight, especially if your child is starting with only consuming highly processed, primarily gluten and dairy containing foods. I encourage parents to try a food-first focused approach for nutrients whenever possible, but the truth is that for many of these children, they're deficient in nutrients already because they've been so self-limited in their eating, so some guided supplementation can be really helpful. I always tell my clients, we are working towards the most nutrient-dense and least restrictive diet that we can get your child to willingly accept. That's my goal. So why do some people still say that there's not enough evidence to support the diet? Well, as we've talked about before on this podcast and throughout my content, there is a research gap that exists of approximately 17 years where the science that comes out, the research that is published, it takes approximately 17 years for it to be widely accepted as common knowledge by the mainstream knowledge and the conventional medical world, the traditional realm, right? Before it's common knowledge, it's about 17 years of a research gap. As I've said before, I think, I hope, I pray that with the advancement of the internet in these last 2 decades, my hope is that the next time a study is done on the research gap, it will be significantly smaller than that. But who knows? I hope, because we desperately need to close that research gap. A decent portion of the research that has been conducted on the gluten-free, casein-free diet, especially studying the diet's impact on autism, it has not been trialed long enough. The literature, it's not always done right, and so it doesn't shock me that some of the results of these studies that have been around for the gluten-free, casein-free diet, they come up inconclusive or, show that it doesn't really make that much of a difference. And as someone who now is, has experience and expertise in this area, I look at those studies in such frustration because a few days or weeks to evaluate the true capacity of a healthy gluten-free, casein-free diet on your child's health and development is just simply not enough. And further, many of these studies are also not using healthy gluten-free, casein-free diets. Sometimes they're using one or the other, gluten-free or casein-free exclusively, but not mutually. So hopefully to you understand why that doesn't make sense now. If you've listened to this podcast in the previous episode. But when journalists or the mainstream media are discrediting the impacts of gluten-free, casein-free diets, typically on autism, but, again, I'm trying to get us to think broader, but I want you to look closer at the studies that they're citing and that they're referring back to. Are the studies, how long are their trial periods? How long did they really look at this diet for? Are they really following a healthy gluten and casein-free diet, or are there still obvious food triggers that would be masking the improvements that we would see from a gluten and casein-free diet because that same response is being triggered by these other synthetic food chemicals and whatever else is in there, More often than not, it's not the full picture. What are gluten and casein being replaced with? Did they also move to more organic whole foods versus less processed foods with synthetic food chemicals? Because there's going to be a difference in outcomes here. As I've said before, though, thankfully, through parents who are telling their families stories and collaborating with functional practitioners and holistic providers around the globe, the paradigm is shifting. The way that we look at development and the brain and the body and all of this and these conditions, it is shifting. Slowly but surely it is. But make no mistake, parents are the ones who are leading this movement. In fact, many of the leading biomedical doctors in this field are also parents of children or individuals who have autism, like Dr. James Adams from that study that I've referred to quite a few times. If you are a parent who is thinking about, or maybe you're already on this gluten-free, casein-free diet trial with your child, whether they have autism or not, because you know that I'm trying to get us to think about the benefits of a healthy, gluten-free, casein-free diet well beyond children with autism. I just want to thank you for being here with me. Thank you for your time today. I hope that this has helped clarify answers to your questions that you may have around starting a gluten-free, casein-free diet trial, or maybe you already have started the trial but this has helped clear up some questions that you've had. I hope that it's been helpful. If you need further support with this, please check out the resources that are free on my page. Speakingofhealthandwellness.com. I have a free Nourishing Picky Eaters guide on my site that also has gluten-free, casein-free, soy-free, healthy recipes in the guide. I also have some recipes on my website, speakingofhealthandwellness.com, and I've got other featured podcasts and other resources that I think might be helpful for you. And while you're there, you can also check out my distance coaching options to see if it might be the right fit for your family, and if so, please feel free to reach out, self-schedule a complimentary discovery call so we can chat, see if we're a good fit, and yeah, you can apply for distance coaching that way. I am currently accepting clients right now, but I only take on a certain amount of clients at a time, so if this is something that you are interested in, jump on that sooner rather than later, because once I'm at capacity, I close it and then reopen it and close it and reopen it. Right now, we're open. So I would be honored to see if we are the right fit to work together. And if we're not, I would be happy to direct you in the direction that I feel might be more appropriate for your family at this time as well. All right. I hope that this has been helpful. I hope that you have a fantastic remainder of your day, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. I hope that you make it a good one today. And yeah, take care, everyone, and I look forward to talking to you soon. Thanks again for listening to Speaking of Health and Wellness, the podcast. I'm so grateful you've taken the time. For any of the references mentioned in the show, head over to speakingofhealthandwellness.com. If this episode resonated with you or inspired you, it would mean so much to me if you took a moment to subscribe, write a review, share it on social media, or with someone in your life who could really benefit from this information. Your support helps this podcast and the overall message and mission of Speaking of Health and Wellness reach more people. If you share on Instagram, tag me so I can personally thank you for listening. If you're on Facebook, come join our free community group of like-minded parents and professionals. The direct link is in the podcast description. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks again so much, and take care.